HR leader, and he's the Chief People Officer of Big Basket. We're really going to delve into the unique challenges that women are facing navigating their careers with practical tips and advice on how to overcome them. So, Hari is the CPO at Big Basket, and he's a well known startup guy. He's an IITian and IIM graduate, and he has spent long years at Tata Steel, first as an engineer and then in HR. He has also been through two mergers and acquisitions. He believes in startups, jargons don't count because one has to execute, perform, and make things happen in real time. Hari discovered the kick in working for high growth companies. He worked at Daksh, where he was instrumental in growing the employee strength from 2,000 to 25,000 people. So, Hari, a very, very warm welcome. We're so excited to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Sukirti. I'm excited to be on your show. Absolutely
Aw-
excited.
Awesome. So, Hari, let's just delve into it. You've been in so many roles, you've been at so many leading startups, you've led teams with like 25,000 people. So, you've seen lots of women and you've seen lots of women trying to rise in their career. So, what do you feel is the biggest challenge that women face?
I think the biggest challenge is a huge mindset. I think that has developed over centuries. The humongous amount of voluntary, involuntary, negative bias that has accumulated is the biggest constraint. And I think it manifests itself in many ways. It manifests itself in society, and companies are a subsystem or a subset of society, and careers are a subset of what people play, the roles people play in society. So, for instance, there is a big stereotype that men are expected to play leadership roles and women are expected to spend a disproportionate amount of time and take accountability for the home front. So I think that's a very, very big bias. And it plays out in so many very complex ways. I think this is clearly the biggest. For instance, the way women and men get married. Typically, men have married below and women have married upwards, which is men pick women who are younger than them by, a few years. In my parents' generation, my mother
Even
was
10,
maybe
12
10 years
years.
younger
Yeah.
to, yeah, 10, 12 years. In my generation, it may be 2 years, 3 years. But still, the man always picks a woman who is slightly younger. And this has long-term career implications because when both begin to work at some point of time, if they do, then the man will always be in a role, typically earning more than the woman. And when it comes to making a sacrifice, when one of them has to relocate or they decide to start a family, it will always be the woman who ends up making the sacrifice because her salary would be lower. So I think it plays out in so many ways. I think the biggest is the huge mindset and stereotyping that exists in society that men have to play leadership roles and women have to play homemakers. And it's surprising that this is not, a India-centric phenomenon or an emerging economy phenomenon. It has been actually there in every part of the world. Very interestingly, I think the US, in terms of women's liberation, got liberated even after India. They have been lagging even a country like India. In the late 60s, when there was this feminist movement really took off along with the civil rights movement, the Black movement, all of these actually took off at that point of time. And in 1964, when the Civil Rights Bill was passed, there was a clause around equality of race, equality around color, but gender was not included even then. I think feminists had to fight hard to be able to include gender even in the 1960s, 1964 to be precise. And prior to that, in 1963, a woman just couldn't get a credit card in the US unless her husband signed off that she needs a credit card. So I think even in Western countries, there has been so much of bias about women and women's abilities. In fact, only during the World War II, women went out to work because families had no choice, because men
The
were
men
out
were
there
away.
at the battlefront, and there was no choice, so women came out and began working. But when the war was over and when men began returning home, women went back to work. And, this entire women's liberation movement went through so many ups and downs. After the civil rights movement, for instance, in the US, when Ronald Reagan became the president, I remember I was studying at IIT at that point of time. They went back to, saying that a woman's place is at the home. So they painted this happy family kind of thing and said a woman's place is rightfully at home. And they made it appear as if that's the great thing about a good family. So I think very subtly, all of us have been influenced. Even women have been so influenced about these stereotypes. For example, I won't be surprised. My mother would believe that the place of a woman is at home. So if me and my wife, had to discuss who is to work, my mother's bias would be clearly, my son has to be working. Is there any doubt about that? So I think even women have been brainwashed over centuries that this is their role. Some of them have become happy with it. They have propagated those same stereotyping downwards to their families, children. The way the boys have been brought up by mothers that, you don't have to clean up at the work at home. You just have to, study and do a few things. The girl or the mom will take care of this. So I think this is the biggest way. And I can talk at length about this in terms of how it plays out at the
But have you
workplace and
seen, now
many
you've been
stories
in
about that.
the business area for a long time and you've been in HR for a long time. Have you seen a shift? Because I think a lot of times we know that this is not going to change overnight, but the real question becomes is, has there been a shift in thinking?
Yes. So I think, in terms of intent, there has been a clear shift, and diversity and inclusion has become an important agenda for many companies. And I will talk a little bit about that because it's politically right. Many companies say the politically correct things, and sometimes I would see that diversity, inclusion, gender equality have remained at the surface and not necessarily percolated downwards. Having said that, I think the good number of companies have been very progressive, become very progressive, and it have taken all the right kind of measures to be able to get women into senior leadership roles. Having said that I think the baggage is too vast. It's very difficult to overcome that baggage very easily because you need a critical mass of women at every level. And at every level, there's a tendency to drop off because some things you cannot really change because women have to bear children. So when it comes to bearing children, they take time off and it becomes even more difficult for them to come back. So, there are a lot of challenges, but I think ultimately the true test of whether a company has been very successful at this is to I'll say one indicator, just use one indicator, which is look at the top management of the company and see what percentage of them are women. If a good number of them are women, I think this company is absolutely amazing because that's the one metric. If you can change that, if you can get to that, I think they've really cracked it. So I think Google, despite all the challenges, despite all the things, that I have questions about their conduct on many things, but I think on this single metric, they've done really well. So I think it is changing, but there are too many things stacked up against rapid change.
So I think that takes us right into the heart of our conversation. So how can women really scale their careers? And how can we actually go? And we know that we talked about there are 7 things that we need to do. So let's get into that because I think that's what people are waiting for. And like I said, Hari is going to take all your questions. So please keep, putting them in so that we can line them up. And whatever questions you want to ask, like I have questions like how do you get a raise? When should you ask for a raise? Do you talk about your family issues? Any questions
Yeah,
that you
yeah.
have on your mind. Go ahead, Harry.
Great. So I think let me talk about, the 7 things. I think that's what you wanted me to talk about, some 7 tenets. You have Kavi's 7 habits. Why not 7 tenets of, looking at your career? Because that's a good way to memorize it as well. So I think a lot of what I will talk about as important career determinants are important both for men and women. It's important for women to be as cognizant of these as it is for men. So I think it works for both. But I think there are some subtle nuances which I will touch during when I'm talking about this, as well as during the Q&A. I think the first tenet of a good, successful career, I would say, is assertiveness. Mostly, I will talk about those very specific behaviors which are very essential for making a good career. So I think the number one thing is having assertiveness. And I will tell you, illustrate this to the extent possible with some stories, because I think stories have a way of communicating a message very powerfully and a way in which you can remember it. I used to be a very young person at Tata Steel when I joined the company. I was a 23-year-old person. I think when I was 30, I was an executive assistant to one of the vice president engineering and raw materials. Those days, a VP meant a lot. These days, everybody is a VP. You have VP this, VP that, it's an entry-level position in banks. And the managing director was the CEO, the managing director, and the 6 VPs comprise the top management of the company. Every fortnight, this group of 7 would meet. It was a hierarchical company, Tata Steel those days, even today, maybe it is. In the boardroom, the meeting would take place. The MD would be at the head of the table. It's a long wooden table on both sides. Three VPs on each side would sit around him. And it was very clear who would sit on which chair. There would be no mistake. A VP who was to sit adjacent to the CEO would never make the mistake of sitting on the third chair, would always sit in the first chair. And the executive assistant of the MD would also join these meetings and make the minutes so that the next meeting there could be some follow-up on some of the actions agreed. In one of the meetings, the MD's executive assistant wasn't present. He was on leave. So I was the EA to one of the VPs, so I doubled up and played that role. And during the course of the discussion, one of the things that we discussed was the sale of a division of the company. And the MD had a point of view, and he expressed it right at the beginning. And one of the VPs, mildly tried to object and find, a fault with that approach or say that was not the best thing to do. And he was brushed aside very rudely, and he kept quiet. And in the bio break, I heard another VP telling this VP, what you were saying, made a lot of sense. I don't know why the boss wasn't willing to listen. My thought was, if you felt that way, why didn't you speak up where it mattered? What's the point of saying this in the loo? How does it matter when you say it one-on-one? How does it create an impact? Maybe if you had spoken up that day, it would have created a completely different decision. The company would have gone down a different path, and that would have created impact. So the lesson in this is that, it is important to be assertive, because by being assertive, you're not only doing good to your career and yourself, but also you're doing good to the company that you're working for. You're able to create impact. So I think it is a foundational trait, being assertive. And I think
I'm
it
going to
creates
ask you a
impact.
question here
Yes,
too,
please
because
interrupt
a
any
lot
moment.
of women get concerned because when we are assertive, we're taken as being very aggressive.
Yes,
So,
yes.
where is that thin line between assertive and aggressive?
That's a good point. So I think the way I would put it, which goes back to, go to my other tenet, which is the middle path. I'll just talk about that a little later, but let me address your question. So I think, let me not differentiate between men and women. I would say that, you don't care about what others think. I think it's important to blend in assertiveness. Assertiveness is very important. And assertiveness is not about aggression. I think assertiveness can be very respectfully, but courageously expressing a point of view where it matters. At a point of time where you could be potentially very scared of doing so, being able to express it, I think that is assertiveness. If you're not assertive, how do you deal with jerks? How do you deal with narcissistic individuals? How do you, create impact? How do you help create a program? How do you ensure execution can happen? Because if you can't follow up with individuals who are expected to deliver some things at a particular time or on a particular date, and if they keep slipping, and if you can't assertively remind them of their duties, what they're supposed to do, their commitments, then your entire execution will suffer, no? So your ability to execute, your ability to deal with jerks and narcissists, your ability to get your ideas out there and get others to accept your ideas, your satisfaction that your ideas have been implemented, can only happen when you're assertive. Sometimes if you have a point of view, if you remain timid and not assertive and don't express it there, you're going to come back out of that meeting and feel very frustrated. You know what? That nobody ever heard me out at all. So I think, assertiveness is very, very critical. But I think, there is a bias, which is that some men tend to expect women to be very coy, expect women to say yes, expect women to, not necessarily be assertive. I think that's a bias that some men are likely to have. But I think you don't have to care for that. And I think some men also get penalized sometimes for being assertive. So I think what one should do is do it the right way. You should not come across as disrespectful, shouldn't come across as aggressive. You should come across as respectfully expressing an opinion or point of view fearlessly and respectfully. I think irrespective of man or woman, this should be done. So if somebody misjudges you, don't give a damn is what I would say.
All right. At least that's good because I think this is the fearful part. But I think you're so right and you put it so well that if we're not able to be assertive, how do we even show that we're able to take the next step of being a leader, of being in charge when we can't put
Yes,
our points of view across?
correct. See, one thing I always, get asked often is that, I don't find it easy to express myself in a large group, I tend to get a little scared. I'm not naturally very assertive. So what do I do? I think there's a way. Not everybody necessarily is assertive. So for instance, even if you go to, political leadership, you had prime ministers like Atal Bihari Vajpayee and PV Narasimha Rao, who are not necessarily very assertive people, but the lack of assertion, they used it in a very positive way. So for instance, both Narasimha Rao and Atal Bihari Vajpayee did not attempt to solve every single problem that came their way. They avoided solving some problems. They ignored some problems because they knew they had the wisdom to realize that some problems just go away with time. So the lack of assertiveness was used very strategically. But having said that, I think even if you find it difficult to be assertive, you can practice it and develop that. So for instance, if you think that you can't easily speak up in meetings, you should go prepared. So whatever is the topic of that meeting, you should go prepared, because being prepared gives you that extra confidence to be able to speak up. Do small things. For example, if you're cut off or cut out when you're making your point, make it a point to say, can I complete my train of thought? Otherwise, I will lose it. So express yourself that way. And when you do that, nobody is going to cut you out easily because they know that you're not going to be not a pushover. But once you allow yourself to be pushed over and allow people to cut you out, then that is going to continue to happen. And after that, you will feel miserable. So I think being assertive is a very foundational trait. And I think in fast-paced organizations, it's a little more important than in, I think, slow growth organizations. Because in fast growth organizations, people don't have the time and patience to ask everybody, do you have an opinion? Can you please speak up? You need to compete. There is a, mind share, there is a competition in every meeting. So if your ideas have to win, you will have to be able to speak up. You'll have to express your point of view. You'll have to say what you think is right or wrong. So I think that's very important.
And
So
Hannah
I
has
think,
said it very
yeah,
well. It depends on how you present yourself. It's so true.
yes. Yeah. Yeah. The second thing I would talk about is a little bit about, the gap between knowing and doing. I think that's a very important thing in life and in a career. And let me illustrate this with a story. All of us, must have heard of the 2008 financial crisis. Many of us have lived through parts of that. It impacted the world. It impacted India. And the world was collapsing in 2008. Lehman Brothers collapsed, $660 billion of assets written off completely. And the whole world was falling apart. But didn't everybody know, or didn't a good number of people know that this was about to happen? Didn't a good number of people know that a bubble was building up? Didn't a good number of people know that the housing market was completely bloated? A good number of people knew that. But the difference between knowing and doing is what determines you as an individual. I've always said, good investing is never about knowing financials. It's never about being able to read balance sheets and P&L statements and understanding ratios. Good investing is about character more than anything else. And that's why people like Warren Buffett are very successful investors. They don't understand P&L as much as they demonstrate character. So at this point of time, there was a banker by name Paulson. John Paulson was his name. And he ran a hedge fund. And he shorted the real estate market, the housing market, because he knew it was highly overvalued. And if you are from a financial background, you will understand what shorting means. Shorting means selling stock that you do not have when you realize that the stock is overpriced. But the risk of shorting is that you can become bankrupt because the market may not really collapse. And then you'll have to buy back the stock at high prices and give it back to someone you borrowed from. So the markets can remain irrational for far longer than you can remain solvent. But John Paulson took the gut decision and went and shorted the market, and in the process made $13 billion of profit. So that was the difference between knowing and doing. So many of us knew that the market was overvalued, but he was the one who actually took the decision of betting his home and hearth and farm and making money out of it. Similarly, Goldman Sachs, at that point of time also was going down. The stock price was going down, and Warren Buffett went and invested $5 billion in Goldman Sachs. And he also got the right to buy additional $5 billion of Goldman Sachs at a later point of time. And that was when the markets were going down, he went and executed this decision. This was about doing, the courage to do the right thing. So it's not about knowing. So all of us know what is right and wrong. Very few of us are able to speak up in a company that we work for and say what is right or wrong. When the CEO is telling you do this, and sometimes when you sense it goes against the values and culture of the organization, are you able to speak up? So you may know that what he's saying is wrong, but are you able to speak up? That is character. I think that is about difference between knowing and doing. So I think a lot of us tend to fall, short when it comes to bridging this gap between knowing and doing. For instance, when it comes to values, we know what is the right thing to do, but many times we see someone who is senior who is breaking a value, breaching a value. Do we speak up? So I think that's again a gap between knowing and doing. So I think knowing and doing in some ways reflects character. So it's very critical to be able to do the right kind of things, not just know what is right and wrong. So I think it helps you, do many things. So I think ultimately a character is eventually what makes you successful in your career or in life, because it's very, I would never underrate this, or I would never be able to emphasize this enough. So character, I think, is very, very critical.
Hina
And
is
I'll quickly
asking this
just,
question here, but it
yes,
requires caution because sometimes those who speak up are called whistleblowers and are negatively perceived. Like nobody likes it, and especially some of the bosses, they literally shut you down. They don't
yes.
take it very well if you're going against, even though they'll say, "I want your opinion." When they even say that, they actually want you to agree with them.
Correct. So I understand that not all organizations, not all circumstances are conducive for a free and fair expression of your thoughts. I think if you are at a place where you find it extremely difficult to express your thoughts and that's making you uncomfortable, a place where things are a bit unethical, then you shouldn't be in that place. So I think that's very critical. And I'm not saying that you need to call out every single thing that's not working in your country or in your company. Many things don't
Especially
work
in
in the
your
country or in
country,
the
I
company.
think.
Yeah, many things don't necessarily work, but you don't have to call out every single thing. You need to pick your battles very smartly. So I think if you start calling out every little thing, then people don't pay importance to the big things that you call out. It's the little boy who cried foul, 4 times, but when it really mattered, nobody came to assist him. So I think you have to just pick your battles, but I think you should never forget the fact that character is important. You should do whatever is the right thing to do. I think there will always be that fear, before doing that right thing. It's about, it's like saddling up, however scared you are. And I think courage is not about not being scared at all. It's about knowing what to be afraid of. It's about doing a few things in spite of being scared. So I would say that if the place is very unfair, very unethical, just move on from there. But I think otherwise, if it's largely ethical, then I think pick your battles and figure out what are the things that you really want to fight.
So, a couple of questions and
Yeah, yeah,
comments
I
have
love
come
any.
in.
I mean, any.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So
absolutely. Any
Radhika is
questions and
saying it
comments? I'd
becomes
love to. Before
difficult
I.
when lady bosses are abusive, So that's very interesting. Hina says, especially when you
Yes.
speak matters, social media has also become a place where you have to be very careful. And Vandana is saying it's your upbringing and family cultures where women are not heard, and this is carried into the workplace.
Yes, yes, everything is true. I think a lot of the upbringing in the families, family cultures, as I said, we are all part of the society. Companies are a subset of the society. So society's values tend to percolate into companies. And I think as smart individuals, as people who are trying to create good companies, we have to change some of those mindsets, at least in our circle of influence. And that's something that we can try and do. And undoubtedly, I think, yes, I have also seen this, that sometimes when women speak up, some of the male bosses may not like it, especially because I think there is an expectation that they would be coy, that, there is a certain expectation of behaviors. So I think those are mindsets that will have to be changed with time.
Hari, now a couple of more questions. Is it better
Yes.
now? This is real advice. Is it better to disagree on a one-to-one basis rather than in front of the whole group? And When a woman speaks up, it's always doomed as negativity and a very bad gesture, is what Amita is saying. But I think this advice, when you do want to dissent with somebody and it is a serious issue, what is the best way to dissent?
Correct. Very good point. So I think there is no one answer. I think some degree of diplomacy is helpful because we are all political beings, animals. We have, a certain ego that all of us would like to preserve. None of us would like to be insulted or being let down in an open forum. So having said that, I think it depends on the culture of the organization. Some cultures encourage you to express dissent one-on-one and are more receptive to dissent one-on-one. So I think even the most open organizations, you need to follow a balance, which is you need to realize what are some of the issues I can publicly dissent or disagree with, and where do I have to express dissent in private? Where do I call the CEO one-on-one and tell him that this is not the right way of doing it? But where is it that you can stand up in a group, in a larger group, in a management team meeting or a different, bigger meeting, and then express dissent? So I think it's a combination of the issue that it is under discussion, as well as the culture of the company. Some cultures completely are okay with dissent. But I think the reality is that, in fact, this is one of the chapters in our book, Diversity Beyond Tokenism, because we've talked about dissent being such an element, fundamental component of diversity, that, every element of diversity, whether it's gender, LGBTQ, race, color, is all embedded under the, ability to tolerate and encourage multiple points of view. So I think ability to live with dissent, encourage dissent, nurture dissent is the most important element of diversity. So many people are not able to do it. Many organizations struggle with dealing with dissent, as a result of which, all bosses or most bosses like endorsement, like that people to say, yes, I agree with you. Yes, you're great. Yes, this decision is good. So I think dissent is not something that all of us find it easy to accept and deal with. So I think as an individual, you need to figure out, again, which battles to pick, where you should express your dissent in a group, where you should express it one-on-one. If you want to fight for a bigger cause, sometimes you need to give up the need to express it in a bigger group and call up your CEO one-on-one and actually convince him. And, these are all styles of influencing. Influencing is a very important component of accomplishing some things. And one way of accomplishing something is, let's say you're part of a cross-functional team and you're trying to create, a unanimity on a very difficult topic. It always helps to meet individuals on that group one-on-one. Talk to them, listen to what they feel about it, listen to where they stand, listen to their deep concerns, see how you can factor that, and then bring the entire group into a larger setting where you can then discuss. If you bring the whole group together, leadership group together, and begin to discuss things and surprise people, then you may not be able to get a buy-in. So all of these are techniques of influencing. So where to use one-on-one, where to use, dissent in a group, all of that you need to judge and do.
So Hina has some good advice. She's noticed that when she presents facts and figures, when she speaks with confidence and grace, and when I speak to the correct people, she is successful.
Lovely. Absolutely.
We'll go on to 10 and 3, and then I will take Amita's comment also.
Yes,
That,
yes.
yeah.
Yeah. So 10 and 3 is, I would say, a middle path. The middle path, all of us know, Lord Buddha was born as Prince Siddhartha. Prince Siddhartha had pretty much everything in life, all material comforts, great family, a lovely young son. But somewhere he was not happy. He didn't find happiness. And all the material comforts didn't give him happiness. So he left everything and, went to the jungle and lived in very difficult circumstances. He subjected his body to all kinds of torture, fasting. At one point of time, he was in a near-death situation. Some women at the riverside actually took him home and saved his life. So at the end of all this, the realization that he came to is something that we have always been taught since when we were kids, which is follow the middle path, which is no extreme is good. So no extreme is good. So take the middle path is such a lovely set of advice for a career as well. I think, no extreme is really going to work. From time to time, we are always faced with this dilemma of either or, this or that, artificially presented binary choices, often mutually exclusive choices. And we get stuck in that, conundrum you don't have to always pick one choice. There's something in between. And sometimes you need to pick, black and white. Sometimes you need to live with shades of gray. And what happens to mediocre people is that where you need to pick black and white, where you need to say what is right and what is wrong, they go around on shades of gray. Where you need to live with shades of gray, they always try to look for simplistic black and white answers. So I think the middle path is a very important broad principle. So I think, for example, in a career, the way it plays out is, should I pick a job that I really love? Or should I love whatever job I get? I think it's not a choice that you have. You should do a bit of both. You should try to find a job that you really love doing. And at the end of the day, you just can't walk out of a job, within 10 days. You should try and see whether you can make it work, whether you can like what you do, because always you don't get what you like. So life, when it comes to a career, is also about this. It's also about the kind of people that you work with, the kind of bosses that you encounter. Sometimes you like them, sometimes they're absolutely amazing, sometimes they're not so amazing. You can't always, expect that one type only is going to work. Again, this question, should I speak up or should I clam up? I think it's not black and white. Again, there's a middle path. You have to speak up. You have to figure out where to speak up and where not to speak up. So that's a choice, again, that you need to make little thoughtfully. So it's not black and white. Should I speak up? Should I stay quiet? Will I be seen as aggressive? Will I not be seen as aggressive? So I think the middle path is always should I speak the truth always, even if the truth is damaging? Or should I be politically correct? Again, it's not a black and white choice. Sometimes you need to be politically correct. The rare situations demand that you be politically correct. But many situations that demand that you boldly speak the truth and be on the side of the right. So I think that middle path, navigating that middle path is sometimes where we struggle. Work-life balance. I end up spending too much time at work. My family doesn't get any time, or the other extreme. I'm very complacent. I want to spend a lot of time here. So I think that also is the middle path. You need to figure out and decide what is the right thing to do when it comes to your career. So
So,
let me pause
yeah,
here.
hurry.
Yeah.
I'm going to come back because lots of questions are coming in this
Yes,
because
I think questions are
especially
better. Yeah.
yeah, because a lot of the women definitely feel when we are speaking up, they feel that we are, I think there's audacity. How dare they, or how dare she, I should say, you know. So this is very, very difficult. I mean, I know it's easier said than done, but how do women get that confidence? How do we give them that confidence? Because on the other side, the other party is actually very negative, or even the looks are very negative.
See, I think there are two aspects to this. I think if I am fair, if I have to give you an honest answer, there are two sides to this. One side, I'll give you a story. In the 2018 Wimbledon, Serena Williams was coming back after a pregnancy. And, she lost the game because she was penalized by umpire Carlos Ramos because she called the umpire a cheat and a liar. Because of the penalty, she lost the Wimbledon. And social media was irate. I mean, it broke up into two camps. One camp really felt that, a black woman was being penalized unnecessarily by a white man. A white man was being extreme and therefore was penalizing a black woman. And she could have probably won the Wimbledon. But there was another school of thought which also said that, Carlos Ramos was probably being the same. He would have done that for a man as well. So now look at this issue, right? How complex it becomes. Should Carlos Ramos behave differently because Serena Williams was coming back from a pregnancy and was a woman? If he would not have penalized a man who did the same, then it's clearly being discriminatory based on gender. But data showed that Carlos Ramos was equally tough with male players who were violating the law and who were doing similar things, who were misbehaving in the same way. So sometimes I think we tend to fall into this trap of isms, and isms can be gender related or feminism, anything. And sometimes I think that is not necessarily correct. But having said that, I think there are genuine situations where women are expected to experience a lot of the bias that we have talked about. And I think the only way to deal with this, to my mind, is there are two ways. One is you have to figure out whether the place I am in is generally a fair place or not a fair place when it comes to gender equality. If it's not a fair place, you shouldn't be there in the first place. And if it's a reasonably fair place, I would say that you should not hesitate doing what is right. You should not hesitate being yourself. You should not hesitate what career successful man would have done in that situation. So I think you should just do what you think is right. So I think there's no other way other than that.
Okay, Radhika is asking now how to sustain a job where your boss discovers that you know better than her, but yet she demands you should take her classes.
So bosses knowing less than the team member and feeling insecure about it has got nothing to do with women. I think there are several male bosses also who feel insecure when they are dealing with team members who are smarter than them. Only very, very competent and secure leaders go out and hire people who are smarter than them and are actually able to inspire them to do good. So I think this is a bigger issue. It's got nothing to do with gender. The question is, if the question is how do you deal with the boss who feels insecure, I think that's a different topic. Dealing with bosses who are insecure, and when you happen to be smarter than your boss, how do you deal with that? I think many men also face the same situation.
But it's so funny because I keep seeing this coming back in the chat that this feeling is there that men do not like intelligent, outspoken, smart women.
Yeah,
So
I think,
I know, Hari,
yeah,
I'm pushing you on this point
no,
because
no,
this
no.
is continuously coming back. So that means that is so deeply
Yes,
entrenched in us also.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think, and let me make a point here, which is that I have seen, male leaders who are otherwise very ethical and fair, who will always generally do the right thing, who always say the right thing, also when it comes to women, tend to be a little patronizing, which is as long as the woman concerned is not very ambitious, as long as the woman concerned is not very aggressive, they are very supportive. But the moment the woman concerned becomes aggressive, ambitious, and competing, they may not be as supportive. So I think that element does exist, which means that seemingly outwardly very fair, ethical male bosses also have this deep thing that women should not be competitive, should not be aggressive. That's a mindset. I think gradually that will change with time. I don't know. We can accelerate that. We all have a role to play in that.
Good. Thank you. I'm just repeating what is coming up in the chat here, but go
Yeah.
ahead. I want to hear point number 4 because I want to ask definitely how do I ask for that race question?
Yeah. The next one is, I would say, all of us must read Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Successful People or Highly Effective People. The first 3 habits are about how to be a better professional, good professional, individual professional. The next 3 habits are about how to work in teams, how to collaborate in teams, how to synergize across individuals and across teams. And the last habit is about continuously learning. I think this is such a powerful tool. I think after the Bhagavad Gita, I think this is such a powerful tool when it comes to building your careers and building your life. I think there are several frameworks that help you to be effective, but this is one very short, succinct framework, which is the 7 habits. So if you can remember the 7 habits, internalize those 7 habits, and be better at those every day, I think it'll play a very important role in your career. It'll help you to deal with many dilemmas. It'll help you answer so many questions that you come across. It sometimes will help you, to be a better person. So, for instance, in one of the second group of 3 habits, it says, understand first before seeking to be understood. Such a powerful thought, which means that you need to listen very intently. How many of us really listen very intently? So even when we are listening, it's often about rebuttal rather than, listening intently with understanding where that other person is really coming from. And you can be so much more successful if you can just pick up that one single trait. And trust me, it's very easier said than done. It's the difference between knowing and doing. Knowing that listening is one thing, but actually being able to listen is actually very difficult. I would say the courage to sit down and listen, courage needed to sit down and listen is even more than the courage required to speak up in a difficult situation. So I think courage to listen, sit down and listen is very important for all of us. Many times we get feedback which is not we may not like. Many times we may face dissent from our team members. Many times we might face situations where somebody is very aggressively disagreeing with us. So what do you do? So only a tool to handle that is to listen very intently. Such a powerful tool. And there's so many things, proactiveness in the first 3 habits. So I would say that, my tenet number 4 is internalize those 7 habits of highly effective people, understand what each of those really means, become better at each of those every day. So that would be my tenet for.
That's very interesting because this book has been around now forever. And it's so
Yes,
funny that,
yes,
I mean,
yes.
because I think I was also in college and we would talk about the same book. So it's like this
Correct.
has really survived, you know?
Correct, correct. I think any problem that that all of us face has already been solved. We just have to figure out where the answer is. We don't have to rediscover, reinvent the wheel, rediscover the truth. I think everything that really matters in this world, excepting maybe for cutting edge physics and the Higgs boson, has already been invented and discovered and written about.
Awesome. So let's go to point number 5.
Point number 5, I would say, is make the right strategic choices. So I would say that, for companies and individuals, a few strategic choices make or have a disproportionate impact on success. And I mean, I'll give you some examples of companies, I'll give you some examples of individuals. For example, the person you choose to marry makes a very big impact on your life, whether you're a man or a woman. It makes such a big impact on your life. The kind of job that you pick to work for, the company that you pick to work for, has such a big impact. So, for instance, when it came to Big Basket as a company, the strategic choice of holding inventory was such a big advantage for the company. As a company, we demonstrate so many weaknesses. We are imperfect on so many dimensions. But that single correct strategic choice has helped us to weather so many storms. Make My Trip, for example, made the strategic choice of picking hotels as a category as opposed to just staying in the airline ticket booking segment. Whereas Clear Trip just stayed in the ticket booking segment and remained a $200 million company. Whereas Make My Trip went on to become a $3 billion company because they made that pivot and the strategic choice of going in for hotels. So I think, in our life also, we are faced with those 10 big decisions in our life. We need to get those decisions right, whether it's in your career or in your life in general. I think that's very critical. And strategic choices really mean, for instance, it can be very small things. Surround yourself with good people, surround yourself with people who can raise your thinking. Don't focus at all on petty things in life. Don't focus on, my upline manager didn't appreciate me in a meeting. I did all the good work, but my boss got all the credit. Those are all focusing on the wrong things. So I think you should just focus on the right things. They unnecessarily create a lot of angst. They really, your mind, you get sleepless nights, you just get upset. That's all so unnecessary. So I think rise above everything else. I think focus on the important things in life, focus on the important things at work. Don't let these petty things bother you. Don't let petty people bother you. I think surround yourself with people who inspire you. Those are all, I think, making the right kind of strategic choice. So I talked of the right kind of a job, the right kind of company that you work for. I talked about the kind of person you marry. For women, for instance, it's such a big decision. Yeah, I don't know, I feel a little cringe talking about this, but the reality is that the man that a woman chooses to marry, I think, has a bigger impact on her career than anything else, because the man is very supportive and say that, I'll play a big role in the upbringing of the kid and I'll help you with the household work. How many men do that? So if somebody can say that, then it's such a powerful thing for the woman to go back to work and become very ambitious once again and become very, career minded once again. Otherwise, she will never be able to do that. Sometimes, you find a woman always going for a parent teacher meeting, and she's taking time off to go for a parent teacher meeting always. So, but then it's important then for that woman to have that right conversation with her spouse, which is very, very critical. It's important to have that conversation with her family with whom she's staying. It may be her in-laws, it may be her own parents, it could be anybody. So having that conversation is important. That is strategic conversation, which you cannot avoid. If you have that conversation, you will solve a big problem, because that problem nobody can solve for you. You can complain about the world at large, but this is a problem. This is a conversation that only you can fix. So at the time of marriage, figure out who's the right kind of a spouse for me. Will this person be the right choice? And even after getting married at the right time, have that conversation. Don't hesitate having that conversation. So I would say these strategic choices are very critical. And these strategic choices have a long-term impact on the career itself.
Yeah, no, I think this is a very wise one. I think a couple of women have also stated it. The person you marry actually has the biggest impact on your career.
Yeah. I can see a lot of comments on the chat
Yes, so
box.
I
I'm really
think
finding
Vandana
it
is saying
difficult.
besides successful women, there's
Yes,
a man.
successful man.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah,
wish we could find men in this manner. So I will come back to them. I'm picking out the ones that are relevant. Dialogue is important, it
yeah.
keeps the door open.
Yes, yes, yes. Great. I'll just complete my 2 points and then we can, I think, entirely focus on the Q&A and discussion. So I
Absolutely.
think I'll be very brief on the next two, which is, I think, you know, I would call it, resilience, whatever you may call it, in very simple words. This is a phrase that I came across, I don't know who said this. It is get up, dress up, and show up. Right? All of us go through bad moods. All of us go through ups and downs in our life. All of us go through, bad moments at the workplace. Some things don't work out. We goofed up in a very big way. Project didn't work. Bad boss. So I think, if we let it affect us for a longer time, then it's going to impact us in a very bad way. So I would say that be resilient, bounce back, and to be able to do all of that, it's important to be self-aware. So when people are poor on self-awareness, individuals who are not very self-aware, I have noticed tend to struggle to bounce back. They tend to get stuck. They tend to feel very unhappy. So self-awareness, I think, is a very important component of being able to bounce back and get along with people. So what is self-awareness? Self-awareness, I think, is really about knowing who you are, knowing what you're good at, knowing what you're not good at, acknowledging what you're not good at, being easily able to say, I'm really not good at that, I need help. And being able to tell a boss about your own team member who is not, or your colleague who is not present, that it's not me who's done this, it's this individual XYZ actually who contributed to this idea. I just added a few things. So it's in being able to do that. That is, really a bit of character as well as, I think, self-awareness. So I think being able to say, I don't know, those are the people, to my mind, I've always found also are easily more kind-hearted. So I think all of that comes into building resilience, which is ability to bounce back, not getting impacted by setbacks, not feeling too excited by success also. I think that's as important, because people who get carried away by material success are also carried away by material failure. So I think that moderation, that middle path when it comes to dealing with success and failure, I think is very critical. And the other one, which is very closely linked to this, is how do we view success and failure? I think, there is something called egocentric bias. Egocentric bias has determined the way we looked at success and failure. So when you ask anyone, why do you think you did so well last year? Why do you think your company, got off to a great start? Or anything about the success, about their success, their family's success, the company's success, they would usually be pointing to things that they did. I did this because of which, I succeeded. Very rarely they're able to say a bunch of chance circumstances came together and made me successful, made my company successful. My company was at the right place at the right time. We were lucky to have the right kind of investors who gave us our first deal. And after winning the first deal, the second and third were easy to get. And that explains the success. Very few people would be able to say that. So I think if you're able to, underplay your own contribution, the reality is that what we do has a role to play in our success, but many other things also have a role to play in our success. Many people do the same things that we do and are not equally successful. So I think it's important to be humble, to acknowledge that sometimes things that happen by circumstances result in our success. If you are thinking along those lines, then you will also not get too upset by failure, because then you will not attribute everything to yourself. You will realize that you should move on in life. So I think the way you look at success and failure, what you attribute to yourself, also results in some degree of humility. And there is a lot of research to point out that people who always say the success is because of me, they are the same kind of people when it comes to contributing to a cause, social cause. They would not make the contribution at all. People who were willing to say, or who tended to say that My success was because of these circumstances or these good friends that I had. They were people who made far bigger donations to social causes. They were also good people. So I think that's the last thing. I'll pause here and then we'll get to Q&A.
Okay, we're going to have lots of questions. So, first of all, I'm going to ask you the question: how do women ask for that raise, or how do women figure out, because there's a gender pay gap, right? So, we continuously talk about this issue. How, first of all, do you know that are you getting paid the same? And because it's in our mind now and it has been put in our mind. And then how do you kind of correct that problem? And
Very
people,
tricky
please,
question.
you put your questions. Please ask Hari whatever is on your mind.
Yes, yes, please ask. I may not have answers to all the questions, and you may not agree with my responses to all the questions, but I think this dialogue is helpful. So I think this is a very nuanced subject, asking for a raise. Women asking for a raise. In my life, I have never asked for a raise, and I'm a man, right? I've never asked for a raise. I've never been very comfortable in asking for a raise. And I've also believed that asking for a raise is not important. So like coming back to the strategic choices point that I made, I have always felt that, focus on working with the right kind of people. So whenever I looked for, assignments in the companies I work for, the things that I look for was, are these a bunch of people who will inspire me? Are these the kind of people I'd like to hang out with? Are these the kind of people I will respect every day? Are these the kind of people I want to get up in the morning and go to? If the answers to all of those were yes, and answers to other questions like, will I have the freedom to do what I want to do every day? Will I, be allowed to make mistakes? If the answers to all of them were yes, money never mattered. So I think asking for a raise is a bit of a personal choice. So me as a personal choice in my life, I've never asked for a raise. I've never negotiated a salary. So I'm not saying that's right or wrong. By the way, don't judge me on that. I'm not telling you it's right or wrong. I think it's perfectly all right negotiating for a salary and asking for a raise. It's just the choice that I have chosen to make. Now coming to gender pay disparity, a very tricky question. I think we just need to address or think about all aspects of that. So if you just think of this, right? Just think of a company like Google, think of a company like, a Big Basket, think of a company like Make My Trip or Microsoft. They're all fair companies, right? So it is
So
difficult to believe.
I will ask this question because you put Google in there, and Google has been specifically pinpointed as a company
Yeah,
that there was a
we'll come to
gender
that.
pay gap.
So Google is a company I've written about in my book. There are many things about Google that I have disagreed with their approaches, and I have disagreed much more with their curbing the freedom of employees to be able to express themselves. I'll come to that. So I think many of these are generally fair companies. So there is, I would say, no intent to differentiate pay between men and women. So if you try to understand what really results in this gender pay parity gap, what is the meaning of this statement? Does it mean that a product manager at Flipkart who is a woman is paid 20% lower than a product manager who has studied at the same institute who's a man? To my mind, that's unlikely to happen in today's world in many of today's companies. So if you have to break up this idea of what is gender disparity, if you demystify that, it is like this. If a man and a woman start fresh after college at an entry level at a particular company, what happens is that they begin to climb up the ladder slowly. Their salaries are unlikely to be very different. If the performance is almost at the same level, the salaries are expected to go up at the same rate. What happens at some point is that the woman decides to go the family way. That family decides to choose to have a baby. That's when she drops out of the workforce. When she drops out of the workforce, the man who joined with her at the same batch as a batchmate continues to move upwards. Now, this lady who dropped out because of childbirth may choose to come back after 3 years or may choose to come back after 6 years. It's possible. She may choose to decide, career and money is not so critical for me. And, my husband is earning enough. So I'll come back at an appropriate time. So those are some of the big decisions that begin to happen. And it's not just one child. Sometimes there's a second child born and the second career dropout that happens. So as a result of this, I would say this is the motherhood penalty. It is not about a gender penalty. I think mothers face this discrimination and they suffer compared to other working women who don't have children. So it's not about a man and a woman. It's about a woman who has children versus everybody else who can be, everybody else can include women, it can include men also. So I think it's really the motherhood penalty which begins to play out. As a result of it, sometimes she finds it difficult to catch up even. So it's almost impossible to catch up after two childbirths. So the both of them started off as, interns. They became, assistant product managers. She dropped out. He goes on to become a director product engineering, and she comes back as manager product engineering. So maybe 3 levels below, 2 levels below, at which both are the same age, same batch from IIM Ahmedabad, and the salaries could be very different. So I think, this is something that needs to be understood very thoughtfully. And at any point of time, I would say, if you believe that there is a genuine discrimination that you are facing because you're a woman, I think you should not hesitate to talk about it. You should meet your HR head, HR manager about this, inquire about this, have a chat about it if you genuinely feel that way. And I can tell you, wherever I've been in the fast-paced environments for the last 20 years. I've been very thoughtful about it, taken a look at this. So I think this has been my conclusion, that it is the motherhood penalty which really results in this. And whether to ask for a raise or not is a very personal decision. I think many men also don't ask for a raise, very shy of asking for a raise. Some people are very aggressive in asking for a raise. How to ask for a raise, when to ask for a raise is a personal choice. And how you deal with it also reflects about your character. And let me be very thoughtful in how I say this. So for instance, in recruiting, I have found that when it comes to negotiating compensation, it's a very powerful indicator of a person. It's a very strong surrogate indicator about other things about an individual. And I'm not saying you shouldn't be negotiating salary. It is about how you negotiate salary, how rigid you are, what is it that you negotiate about, which really begins to determine many other things. So for instance,
Hari, tell us what we should do and not do. Now we want the exact tips because this is so,
yeah.
so important. You can't just say
So
it's not about
yeah.
what. Now we want to know because, when you are negotiating, the first thing you think about, and I am like that too. Acha, if they've offered me a salary, there must be 10% more on the table. If I
Why
don't
won't a
fight
man
for
think like that? Why wouldn't a man? Let me
a
just
man would
start this
also think
question by
like that, right?
correct.
So you feel that you
So
should be negotiating, and if that is your best chance to get, because once you're in the company, you're going to get that
you should.
six
So I
percent.
think you should see. I said the choice to negotiate has got nothing to do with whether it's a man or a woman. So, for instance, today in the tech talent, it's so scarce, right? When you offer employment to somebody, that person takes your offer letter and goes and shops with two others and comes back to you negotiating. And it could be a man or a woman, it doesn't matter. So a man would negotiate, a woman can also negotiate. So you should negotiate. But if you feel like negotiating, you should. It's a personal choice on how to negotiate, when to negotiate. It's very personal choice. So I think you should not just worry that am I a woman, am I being discriminated, unless there is very compelling evidence about that. If there's no compelling evidence about that, I would say don't worry too much about being a woman. I would say if you wish to negotiate, do negotiate. If you wish to ask for a pay raise because if you think you're underpaid, many times you can always sense whether you're underpaid because recruiters reach out to you, headhunters reach out to you, and they offer you a 50%, pay hike. And that's when you get a sense, three headhunters from different companies and call you and offer you between 50 and 85% higher than what you're making. Then it's high time you talk to your leadership, about this. Whether you're a man or a woman, it doesn't make a difference. The decision to negotiate should not matter on that.
But Nidhi wanted to add something. Go ahead, Nidhi.
Yeah, hi, Mr.
Yes.
Hari. Thanks for your
No,
time.
don't call me Mr. Just call me Hari. Yes.
All right. So, Hari,
Yes.
I just wanted to add something to the point that you raised about
Please.
gender parity, about compensation. So, I'll give you my example. I have worked with a reputed organization, American Express, for donkey years. And I remember that when I went for my maternity leave, which was solid 6 months, and when I came back, I got the best rating for my entire duration during my tenure, in American Express. And the reason so there were a lot of factors that females who went on a family way and they were away for half of the financial year.
Yeah.
Obviously, it was very difficult to justify your time and your contribution in the organization. But I happened to get that because the 6 months I was there, I, really slogged and I
Did well.
which was not possible probably for somebody to achieve in 10 months also. When I switched my career and for looking for work-life balance, I joined a school, which was obviously a female-dominated area. And I always felt that, I was underpaid. And there were no reasons to it because
Okay.
people were equally qualified, and I was probably more qualified than the other people. I had better
Other
growth.
men, you mean? Other men? Other men, you meant?
No, it's just
compared to the other men.
No, they were only females because it's a
Oh,
school.
female. Okay,
So
okay. Yeah, yeah.
it is female dominated. So I'm
Yeah,
just trying to say that, it's very ironical that how we perceive
yeah,
things at times, they are not true. So I
yeah.
just wanted to add that. But I
No,
have
no,
a
very
question
nice.
for you. I
Amex
have,
must have been a great company, yeah, to do
yeah,
what they
yeah.
did.
It's like, falling
Yeah,
in love
hats
with
off.
somebody. It's like your first love and you
Yes.
never forget about it. It's
Yeah.
like that.
Yes,
So I have a
yes.
question. In
Yeah,
your
yeah.
last point, you said that it's important for anyone, to just move on, whether it is your professional contribution and you feel that, you were not recognized for your achievement enough, and, you ended up doing everything, but there was not enough appreciation for the work, and you should move on. You hear this and you know it all the time that one should move on. But is there any strategy that you have in place which can be utilized in our real life to move on, to make it a little easy for us?
Great question. So I think let me give you a little longish answer if you don't mind. I
Oh,
And
think
sure.
Hari, is it
yeah,
okay if we go over because it is 7 o'clock?
I
So
have all the time. I have all
not
the
a
time.
problem. Then we will take all
Yeah.
your time.
Yes. So Nidhi, yeah, I think first thing, and let me be very honest in sharing my own personal experiences.
Yeah.
And all of us are insecure. I have also experienced that insecurity, which is that sometimes when you don't get recognition, you begin to attribute ulterior motives to the people who have not recognized you. And
Yeah.
sometimes you realize that it was never the case. You were unnecessarily agonizing about something that was not worth agonizing, and they were not even giving a damn about that. Very casually, somebody was recognized, they didn't pay enough attention, and you got hurt, and you felt bad about it, agonized a lot, not worth it. Then I think that's one aspect of it. The other aspect is that if you feel genuinely that time and again this is happening, it's not a one-off instance, and time and
Yeah.
again it's happening. And I think all of us are intelligent people to figure out whether there is an ulterior motive to this, and what is the underlying reason why some of this is happening. Why is somebody doing this? Sometimes a manager might recognize a mediocre person and not a very smart person, because that mediocre person does not pose any threat to that manager, whereas a smart person may pose a threat. So sometimes a smart person, you may not get that recognition. So you need to figure out what exactly is the problem.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes if your manager is mediocre and you happen to be very smart, then it's a problem for you. It's a problem for the manager, problem for the organization, because good and bad managers will never be able to retain smart people. So I think the mechanisms inside that company must be able to figure this out. So for instance, in some of the places I've worked, we've looked at precisely this, which is we've drawn the org structure and put color coding. Is the manager a red, and are there some green team members? Green means outstanding potential, and the manager in red
Yeah.
means mediocre. We knew that in this team there will be a problem. So in which case, either you do something about the manager or you do something about the individual, pull this person out. So I think evolved companies should have those mechanisms. Otherwise, individuals will quit and companies need to figure out how to manage that.
I'm glad that what I think is a lot in sync with what you're saying, but I'm yet to, I'm sure there are organizations who are practicing it, and I have also witnessed that. But I think this has to reach out to a lot of organizations. Thanks for your time, Sukriti. I've taken a lot of time. Thanks,
Not
Mr.
a
Hari.
problem. I have
Thank
to
you.
share a joke because I'm sorry, Uday, I'm coming to you. So I used to work for Nokia, and it was a Finnish company. And of course, I was in my early career days. So when we used to send stuff to our boss, he would say, "Great work, good job, XYZ." One day we sent him and we got no response. And we were like startled. Okay, did we do something wrong? What happened? And so all of us got the courage and said, we must ask him. So we went and he said, no, I just heard that you Americans need lots of feedback. So I just keep sending you some. So it wasn't really anything. So I agree with you. Sometimes we just take it in our head that, you know what, that it is something more than it is. Udaya, go ahead.
Yeah. Hello, Mr. Hari. Thank you so much for
Hi
the.
there.
Hi. How are you?
Good.
Yeah, my question is a little different. Actually, I used to work as HR almost 12 years back, and then after that, I went to Family Way. And since then, I have always been thinking of getting back to work, but then something or the other, has kept me busy. And I was out of the country for the past 5 years, and I just came back. So now that everyone keeps telling me that, you have to get back to work, and there are companies really, encourage mothers to come back. Do you think really, 12 years is such a huge gap? And then I really did not have any opportunity to, keep in touch with the latest HR, updates and all that. So what exactly are the companies looking for people like us, and do they really have some, a couple of posts set aside for returning mothers, or are we really compared with the latest youngsters who are just out of college? These things, many
Yeah.
things in
What's
their
the
heads.
gap you said in your career, Udaya? How many years of gap?
12
12,
years.
12
12 years
years.
of gap. So I
Yeah.
think the way I think companies are thinking about this is that some of the progressive companies are looking at in expanding the talent pool. I think sometimes it's compulsion rather than humane values that are driving some of these decisions. And one
Mhm.
compulsion is that companies are unable to find good, talented people. Therefore, they are willing to expand the pool to include returning mothers as well. So I would
Okay.
say that, if you have had a career gap of 12 years, someone your colleague who did not have that career gap of 12 years would
Mhm.
have gone through a set of experiences, and those experiences would include working with teams, leading teams, solving problems, solving complex problems, building consensus around difficult topics, and overall build character and leadership in an organizational context.
Okay.
So it will be very difficult for you to be at the same level as someone.
Exactly.
It will be almost impossible because that person during those 12 years has built capability. So I
Yeah.
think while you may not be compared to somebody who is entry level because you have picked up some other aspects of life in these 12 years, while you may not have been working for a company, you have learned so many other important things in life in these 12 years. So I think it's for the company to evaluate, figure out where you will fit in, and it will be some decision that they will take. It has to be in your interest. You should like it. And I would say today, full-time employment is not the only way. A lot of people are really moving to the gig model. It's not just the blue collar workers who are in the gig model. I'm finding more and more white collar people who are doing so many interesting things. Many of them are not in a job. They are doing some social, they are supporting a social venture on one side. They're helping somebody else raise money, being an advisor for somebody else. And they're actually doing so many things which actually give so much of fulfillment. So I think you should
Yeah.
explore that also, because steady job, one job is not always the right way of looking at it. Especially I think when you have a steady family income, you should begin to explore and do things that you like and do multiple things so that it gives you satisfaction.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for all the talk. Thank you.
Now, one last question before I let you go, Hari. So, a lot of times we are, of course, looking for the next opportunity, interviewing, networking. What should we be doing and how should we present ourselves in the best way possible? Because what is it? Because you have interviewed probably so many people. What are those skills that you look at and say, yes, this person is ready or ready to take the next step up?
I mean, it depends on what role you're looking at, ready to take the next step up. So I would say that when you're interviewing, you look for 2-3 things. So you're interviewing for a job. So there are certain requirements on that job. And those requirements can be broken up into 2 areas. One is understanding of the domain and leadership qualities that are essential to perform on that job. So one will evaluate for both. And the fundamental thing, which is foundational, even more important than these two, are values. So for instance, if somebody in a meeting finds it very difficult to say, I don't know, for me, that's a big red flag. So easily able to say, I don't know, and not having the answers to every single question, not able to have an interactive brain tennis kind of a game. So I think for me are red flags. That person should be honest, easy to work with. That's a foundational value. On top of that, you look for a certain domain, which is ability to have the skills that the job requires, and other one is the leadership which is required. Look for those.
Well, thank you. Hari, anything you'd like to add before we end for today?
Nothing particular. I think wish you all the very best. I would say that the world is changing, and we have a role to play in changing the world around us. I think we need allies of all kinds to change this world, but we also as individuals have a role to play. I talked of the situation where if you are the person who's going to all parent-teacher meeting, it's important that you have that difficult conversation, because nobody can have that conversation on your behalf. And all of us play that role as well, which is changing the little world around us, which can impact our lives.
Well, thank you, Hari, and thank you for all that insight. It was really, really great to have you with us.
Thank you, Sukriti. Thank you, everyone.
And
Really
I'll just
appreciate
repeat
you
what
having me.
everybody is saying. It was a great session. Thank you so much for the pep talk. Thanks too for the awesome session. Thank you for the wonderful, wonderful session. So happy to be part of this session. A lot of people want your email. So
yeah, of course, you can absolutely go out and give out my email. You can give out my cell number. I'm happy to talk to anyone one-on-one.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Hari.
Great. Thanks a lot.